Welcome students, welcome to this presentation on nature and scope of environmental economics. In this presentation, I propose to explain the nature of the subject, its relationship with economics and other social sciences and some physical sciences, and also understand what is the scope of the subject, to what extent, what kind of topics are usually a part of environmental economics. Now, environmental economics is not the same as environmental science or environmental studies. This is using the mainstream principles of economics to understand environmental issues. First, look at the nature of environmental economics. Since environmental economics has the word economics in it, it means that this subject acquires all the characteristics of economics. And to study environmental economics, we use the neoclassical economics as the framework. Now, this neoclassical economics is popularly used to understand many of the economic phenomena that is happening around us. This neoclassical economics has one or two important elements which are also used by environmental economics in environmental economic studies. For example, one of the important element is that the neoclassical economics examines free market mechanism. It believes that markets are free and these free market are the best way for allocating resources, and it is also considered to be efficient. The second important element of environmental economics that is taken from neoclassical economics is that idea about the invisible hand. Now, invisible hand means each decision maker in economics is driven by self-interest. So how does a firm take decision? How does an individual take decision? They take this decision based on what is good for them. Now, environmental economics understands economic issues from this particular perspective. The third important characteristic of neoclassical economics is that of minimal role to the government. Now, whether today environmental economics also provides minimal role to the government is a question. Now we see that, of course, today we see that the government's role in environmental issues is much greater than it plays in other solving other economic issues that happen around us. So there are many legislations that the governments pass today in terms of protecting the environment or correcting the abuse of environment, and these tools are designed by the economist, but they are used by the policymakers to put them into practice. For example, in this particular case, the pollution of water bodies. So here the government cannot be away from being a party to that analysis, and we cannot leave it just to the market. If we leave polluting of the rivers to individuals, then there is no reason why individuals would invest money in correcting the in reducing the toxicity of water and then releasing it into the environment. So here the government takes a role, and therefore environmental economics in this particular case, it moves away from the neoclassical economics. Now, economics is approached from two ways. One is the microeconomic approach, and the other is the macroeconomic approach. Any student of economics by now would have studied these two approaches to economic problem. Environmental economics also uses micro and macro approach, and here the micro approach is to study the individual decision making. It is to analyze the economic issues that are related to environment. It also looks at the incentives and disincentives that can be used to alter the decision making process of individuals and firms. As far as environmental using macroeconomics, it also looks at the aggregative behavior and examines the relationship between economics, income, development, then poverty, and then see how the environment is used or abused, or whether these can lead to degradation of the environment. Now, another important element in environmental economics is to understand the working of natural, biological, and physical laws. Mainstream economics does not look into these biological laws or physical laws because these are not considered to be economic in nature. But in environmental economics, we need to understand these biological and physical laws. For example, what happens when the interconnectedness between the forest and the animals are disturbed? What happens if we move into the forest for habitation or for agricultural activities? How does the human and wildlife conflict, for example, arise? Now, these are the laws of nature. There is a certain balance that is made in by nature itself, and when economic activities take place, we disturb that balance, and this could cause harm both to human beings and to the other creations of nature. Similarly, we need to understand the stop and flow dimension of natural resources. So there is a limit to the availability of all natural resources. The question is, how do we understand the to what extent can we use these natural resources, and how much of resources can be left for the future generation? Now, these relationships between natural resources are dynamic, and it is very complex, and therefore environmental economics needs to understand this kind of relationship and then find the economic value to them. For example, the rate of harvest of fishing. How much of fishing can be done? Can fishing be done endlessly in the sea? So these kind of active economic activities are limited by nature itself, and it is important that environmental economics understands these laws before we go further into the subject. Now let's look at the two main uses of economics. The purpose of economics are to explain phenomena that happens around us. To explain phenomena, for example, in the case of environment, let me take this example of depletion of coal or deforestation. As far as positive economics is concerned, it relies on data, it relies on fact. So we need to know what is the rate of depletion of coal, what is the extent of deforestation that is happening, and these can be measured and these can be analyzed because data can be collected on these kind of matters. These give insight into the destruction that is happening or the availability of natural resources that exist. The second use of economics is to help us in identifying what should be. Should be is normative economics. And when we talk about normative economics, we are essentially talking about economic ideas that are based on value judgments. They are subjective and they differ from person to person. Now, these subjective decision economic understanding of economic behavior will be able to suggest to us how much of certain activities can be taken up and how far can it be carried. How much of water pollution can be allowed, because data is already available. Now the question is how much. Now we need to make policies. We need to make policies relating to fishing. Can fishing be carried on the high seas during the entire year, or should fishing be banned during certain parts of the year when it is a spawning period? So these kind of ideas have to be understood as normative economics, where our own philosophies will guide us in making policies relating to natural resources. The other thing that we need to understand about environmental economics is that it is multidisciplinary in nature. It believes that it is not possible to use mainstream economics and understand and analyze or provide solution to all the activities that happen and how these economic activities affect the environment. It is here that we need to depend upon other social sciences and physical sciences to give us insight into the theories, into the laws, into the to the methods, into the concepts, into the assumptions that different fields of knowledge employ in their study. So environmental economics essentially tries and explores these ideas, though we do not venture into those subjects, but we do try to understand how these subjects can be incorporated into our understanding of environmental issues. For example, sociology as a subject. How does sociology affect environment? Can we study the role of religion, the values and attitudes and culture and food habits? Can we try and understand how these differ from place to place, from communities to communities, from countries to countries? How are these activities affecting the environment? How do they protect their environment in different communities? For example, in India, we have in the state of Karnataka and Kerala, we have these places where forests are worshipped, and when forests are worshipped, we call them Devarkado. And these worshipping of forests are the society's way of protecting environment. It is a society's way of protecting the animals that live in that, or the various rituals that are related to worshipping snakes and other animals. Now, these are society's way of protecting the environment. So we need to understand how sociology as a subject can explain to us these events and these environmental issues that we plan to study in environmental economics. The subject of psychology, whether that allows us to draw any insight from that. Psychology, for example, gives us very good insight into how we understand individuals' perception relating to plant and animals and to nature. For example, the existence of blue whale in the sea. Economics does not understand that because it is in the deep sea and we just understand the whales are in the deep sea. But if we can understand it from a psychologist's perspective, that what is our perception to the killing of these blue whales in the sea, or how do we behave when we respond when we see a blue whale that has been killed, how what is our perception about the deforestation, individual perceptions, how do we understand these kind of activities. So when we understand these things from a psychological perspective, we are able to understand them better, and this can give more insight into the policies that need to be formulated in course of time. There are also ethical and spiritual insights that we require to understand environmental economic issues. For example, in the greed to have more food grains produced or more animal protein to be produced, we may engage in carrying out certain unethical or genetic engineering, for example. Now, are these genetical engineering activities that can produce more food or more animal protein ethical? Is it morally right? Was the sheep dolly a right thing to do? Now, these kind of issues uh, put some limit on the economic greed of appropriating all the resources for economic use. So, these moral and spiritual issues, ethical issues also can be very insightful in understanding the behavior of people relating to environmental resources. Let's look at this particular issue of the access to resources. Here, political science as a subject and institutional economics as another subject that can give us some insight into the resources, its access, and its use. For example, we ask the question: are these resources equally accessible to all? Do all communities have equal to access to resources? Do all nations have equal access to resources? Or do nations, some nations suffer more from these kind of environmental pollution, for example? Or is there more of use of resources by one country than the other? So from these kind of thinking comes the international legislations that have come, and also at the national level these controls that have to be set in of using the resources and abusing the environment. Now we need to know, for example, in the case of common property resources like the meadows, open meadows and areas, is it that anybody can use these forests, What about lakes? How can lake water be used? So these kind of resources need some kind of regulation, and these regulations are developed by political processes. So that is where insights from political science becomes useful in understanding environmental issues. There is also the philosophical component to understanding environmental issues. Essentially, we can say that there are three important philosophies. The first philosophy being that of biocentric, where those who believe in this philosophy believes that all what has been created by nature is for nature itself. It is not meant for destruction. So such people go to any extent to protect trees and to protect animals and the habitation of animals. So they believe that these environmental resources are meant for itself. Now, on the other extreme, we have the anthropocentric. What are these anthropocentric philosophy? People who believe in this anthropocentric philosophy, they believe that all that is available in this nature is available for human beings to use. So human beings are the last of the creation which is meant to enjoy all this creation on this earth. Now that is one way to look at the resources. But then, if all resources have only an anthropocentric use, then it is possible that we use up all these resources at the shortest time possible, because human beings are known for greed, and economics is a study of how people can become greedy when resources are available or not available to them. So here a philosophical perspective becomes useful, and there are others who believe that environmental issues are really not a big issue, because we can provide technocentric solution to all environmental issues. So any problem that can come up, we can provide technocentric issues or technology related issues. So these philosophical perspectives are also important to understand environmental issues, and it helps us in understanding the to analyze how different communities and different groups of people behave related to environmental resources. The other philosophy that is equally important or more important is that of sustainability. Can we understand that these resources are not meant for this generation alone? Do we need to think that these resources are meant for future generations that also? Do we believe that the snails on the picture should be available for the future generation to know that these kind of creatures existed on this earth? Or is it that we destroy all of them now because we need that place for our habitation purposes? So sustainability is a big issue in environmental economics, and to understand sustainability, all these perspectives are important, because all these perspectives give us insight into how different communities in different parts of the world have made some activities or the others sustainable. Now, we know that there are two kinds of resources, abiotic and biotic resources, or sciences. And abiotic is when we are talking about subjects like geography and geology, which are again equally important to study environmental economic issues. For example, we now have the National Coastal Zone Management policy in place. Now, in 2004, when the tsunami struck the nations, there was no policy relating to the tsunami, and therefore a lot of destruction, more than 2 lakh lives were lost during that particular tsunami. Now, after that, a lot of studies have been done to understand the tsunami, and then the economists have had to see what kind of destruction can be prevented, how we can remove habitation from near the coastal zone, and how coastal zone has been demarcated now. Then we can also see how oceanography can be useful in understanding how the development of a blue economy can happen. Blue economy means developing economies based on oceans wealth, fishing and other resources. Meteorology, how environmental economics can understand from meteorology and see how they can be harmful if we cut the forest, and how it can affect the rainfall, and so on and so forth. So there are many issues that can happen. The global warming, for example, all these issues are not biological in nature, they are physical in nature, they are abiotic. And similarly, we understand the subject of geology and we draw insights from geology because that would tell us about the hydrocarbons, the availability of natural gas, and how we can minimize the depletion of these resources, or what can happen when we are constantly um, uh, dumping the garbage into the landfills, what can happen in course of millions of years. So these kind of subjects also provide insight into making environmental policies. It helps us to explain the environment and then create environmental policies. Now look at what is the scope of environmental economics. What kind of subjects do we, these are the what I just mentioned are the insights and the inputs that we draw from other related social sciences, physical sciences and biological sciences to understand environmental issues better. That was one. The second thing is understanding all of these, then how do we limit our study? We cannot study all of this. So we need to understand how to demarcate the study and focus our study into a certain uh, to certain issues. The first issue that we need to now look, that I told you about, the neoclassical economics. So using neoclassical economics, now environmental economics studies markets and the functioning of markets and market failure. What can solve problems of markets, and where do markets fail? For example, why is there no market for garbage? So how can a market for electronic waste, for example, be created? So markets, market functioning, market failure, and solutions to market failure. How can the government take these kind of roles? So that is one big subject that we study in environmental economics. It relates to externalities that can happen when markets function on their own. The second important area that environmental economics focuses on is studying the depletion of natural resources. So, as a positive economics, it makes an assessment of the natural resources that are available and then plans out how to understand the depletion of resources and the extent of depletion that can be done, and what kind of laws and what kind of principles can be applied to restrict the depletion of resources, what incentives and disincentives can be employed. Similarly, degradation of environment. Left to the market mechanism, individuals, neoclassical economics, individuals wouldn't have to think twice to pollute the water from their factories and from their households into the mainstream water bodies. But then we need to understand from the environmental economic perspective that this kind of permission to pollute the water bodies is not good for the environment itself. So there are studies that are to be done on how do we look at the degradation of environment, and what are the mechanisms to understand degradation, and how do we control degradation of environment. For example, what will be the investment in science and technology to understand both the problem of depletion of natural resources and the preventing or reducing the degradation of environment. So how can the governments provide resources for these kind of activities? The other important activity is, for example, the valuation of environmental resources. These environmental resources have got fixed supply in many cases, and therefore fixing up the price for these resources become important. For example, how do we fix the price of the spectrum that is used for transmitting signals? Now the question comes, there is just the supply that is available, and how do we fix the price for that? Or how do we fix the price for a ticket to enter into a national park? How are these tickets priced? So what can determine the price for those kind of activities? How much do we want to spend to keep the rivers clean? So there are many of these kind of issues where we need to find out how to value the environmental resources. And finally, one of the very important part of environmental economics is the planning and the policy formulation. So understanding the economics as environmental economics as a mainstream subject of economics, using the principles of economics, but drawing insights from other subjects like social sciences, physical sciences, and natural sciences, understanding the philosophy guiding the resource use, and then formulating policies on how to protect the environment, because this environment has to be protected not only for this generation but for future generation. The issues of climate change, global warming, pollution of the oceans, desertification, deforestation. These are major issues that are troubling the mankind about future. And therefore, if we do not form policies which are relating to restricting these kind of damage to future, we are looking at a very bleak future in terms of environmental resources. And that is what environmental economics as a subject has its scope. So thank you, students. Thank you very much for watching this video till the end. Please do subscribe. I'm sure that you have subscribed. In case you have not subscribed, please do subscribe to this video. This video will also be useful for those of you who are preparing for your competitive exams. And very often students mix up environmental economics to be the same as environmental studies of environmental science. It is a subject by itself and needs to be understood in a different perspective. So thank you very much.